Welcome to Relaxing Revenge Storytelling. I'm your host, and tonight's story is a real treat.
My name is Margot Riley. I'm 32 years old. On a Wednesday morning in October, I sat in the parking lot of my bank, the one where I work, the one where I spend 8 hours a day examining other people's financial histories for irregularities, and I pulled my own credit report for the first time in my life. I don't know why it took me so long. That's a lie. I know exactly why. Because the first account that loaded onto my screen was a Capital One card opened when I was 14 years old, carrying a balance of $12,400, and the signature on the application was in my father's handwriting. There were 6 more accounts behind that one. I hadn't opened any of them. My fingers went cold on the keyboard before the 7th account even loaded. And what I found behind it would dismantle everything I believed about the man who raised me, the sister I thought I was protecting, and the family I thought I belonged to. But I need to take you back further than that Wednesday. I need to take you back to the beginning. Before I do, if this is your first time here, welcome to our channel. This is a place where we tell stories about the people who are supposed to be safe, who are supposed to be the ones we could trust without checking the fine print. If that hits close to home, I'd appreciate it if you take a second to like this video and subscribe. And if you've ever been afraid to look too closely at something a family member did because you weren't sure you could survive what you find, drop something in the comments, even just a word. You're not alone in this room. Now, to understand how I ended up in that parking lot, staring at a credit report that read like a crime scene with my name at the top, you have to go back to Pittsburgh, 1998, and a 6-year-old girl who thought her father was a hero. My mother left on a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was spaghetti night in our house on Greenfield Avenue, and the pot was still on the stove when my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that Mommy had to go away for a while. He didn't say she wasn't coming back, not that first night. But the pot on the stove went cold, and so did the chair where she used to sit, and within a few weeks, the for a while had become permanent, and the word mommy had become something nobody said in our house without my father's jaw tightening like a bolt being turned. He raised me and my younger sister Petra alone, and I want to be clear about this part because it matters for everything that comes after. He was good at it. Or he performed being good at it so convincingly that a child couldn't tell the difference. He packed our lunches, he showed up to parent-teacher conferences, he worked as an electrician during the day and picked up side jobs on weekends, and when the money was tight, which was most of the time, he'd sit at the kitchen table with his bills spread out like a hand of cards he couldn't win and say things like, "Everything I do for you girls." He said that a lot. It was the kind of sentence that sounds like love until you find out what it actually cost. Petra was 4 years younger than me, born just before our mother left, so she didn't carry the memory of that Thursday the way I did. What Petra carried instead was something softer, more dangerous. She was the easy one. The one who laughed at Dad's jokes, who sat on his lap past the age when most kids stop, who performed gratitude with a naturalness I could never match. Dad called her his golden girl. He called me his rock. I thought those were equal. They weren't. A golden girl gets polished and displayed. A rock gets used as a foundation. You build on it, you stand on it, and you never once ask if it minds holding the weight. I was a careful kid. Organized. I kept my room clean without being told, tracked the grocery budget in a notebook when I was 11, helped Dad with the household filing because he said I had a head for numbers. That was true. I did have a head for numbers. What I didn't have was any idea that having a head for numbers in Dennis Riley's house made you useful in ways a child should never be useful. I graduated high school in 2010. I didn't go to college, not because I didn't want to, but because the financial aid application came back with numbers that didn't make sense to me at the time. Something about expected family contribution being too high, something about existing obligations. Dad said the system was broken, said he'd help me figure it out later, said in the meantime I should work and save. So I did. I got a job at the Giant Eagle on Murray Avenue, worked the morning shift, then picked up evening shifts at a laundromat 2 blocks away. I was 19 years old, working double shifts, sleeping 5 hours a night, saving every dollar I could in a shoebox under my bed because Dad said bank accounts were a hassle and I should keep things simple until I was ready. Keep things simple. That phrase. I can still feel it in my chest like a hand pressing down. Every time I asked a question about money, about the future, about why things felt harder than they should, that's what he said. Keep things simple, Margot. I'll handle the complicated parts. You just keep doing what you're doing. What I was doing, though I wouldn't know it for another decade, was funding my sister's education with my identity. Petra went to Duquesne University. Dad announced it at dinner like it was a family victory. She'd gotten some financial aid, and the rest would be covered by a private student loan he'd worked out. He looked at me when he said it, and I remember the look, this half smile that I read as pride in Petra, but that I now understand was something else entirely. It was relief. Because the private student loan that covered Petra's tuition, $47,000, was co-signed by Margot Riley. My name, my social security number, my signature, forged on a dotted line I never saw, while I was across town stacking cans on a shelf for $9 an hour. I didn't know. I need you to hear that. I didn't know. What I knew was that when I was 23 and applied for my first apartment on my own, a studio in Bloomfield, the landlord called me back with a voice that was careful in the way people get careful when they're delivering bad news. My application had been denied. My credit score was 490. The number on that first denial letter was 490. I didn't understand it yet. I would. I went to my father. I sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he told me my mother was leaving, and I said, I don't understand why my credit score is so low. He leaned back in his chair and told me it was probably a mistake, probably some mix-up at the credit bureau, probably nothing. He said, Don't worry about it, Margot. Those things sort themselves out. I believed him. Not because I was stupid. I want to be very clear about that. I believed him because I was trained to believe him. 23 years of believing my father was the only person in the world who would never lie to me. That belief was load-bearing. Pull it out and the whole structure of my childhood comes down. I wasn't ready for that at 23. So I let the denial letter sit in a drawer and I moved into a cheaper apartment with a landlord who didn't run credit checks, and I kept going. I got my degree eventually. Community college, then a transfer to Point Park University, then a job, then a better job, then the job I have now. Credit analyst at a mid-sized bank in downtown Pittsburgh. I sit at a desk and I look at other people's credit histories and I flag the irregular patterns. The accounts that don't match the timeline. The signatures that look just slightly off. The debt-to-income ratios that tell a story the applicant isn't telling. I'm very good at it. I have an eye for the gap between what someone presents and what the numbers actually say. I built my entire career on that skill, and for 9 years, I never once turned it on myself. That's the sentence I need you to sit with. 9 years. I read irregular patterns for a living, and I never checked my own. Not because I forgot, because somewhere in the back of my mind, in the place where the thing you're afraid of lives, I already knew what I would find, and I wasn't ready to find it. Not until that Wednesday in October. Not until the morning my bank ran an internal credit review on all employees, a routine compliance thing, and flagged my file for review because of what they called inconsistencies in account origination history. My supervisor pulled me into his office, told me it was probably nothing, said I should pull my own report and verify everything was accurate. Standard procedure. He didn't know he was handing me the key to a door I'd been standing in front of for a decade. I sat in my car in the parking lot. I logged into the credit bureau portal on my laptop and I started reading. The Capital One card. Opened when I was 14. $12,400. I stared at the application date, March 2006. I was in 8th grade. I was 14 years old and someone had opened a credit card in my name and run up $12,000 in charges. The authorized user listed on the account was Dennis Riley. I scrolled down. A Discover card. Opened when I was 16. $8,200. A personal loan from a credit union in Monroeville. Opened when I was 17. $15,000. Petra student loan. Co-signed by Margot Riley when I was 19. $47,000. 2 more credit cards. Opened when I was 21 and 22. Combined balance of $23,000. A retail store credit line at Lowe's. Opened when I was 24. Carrying a balance of $6,800. I sat in my car and I counted the total. I did it 3 times because my hands were shaking and I kept losing the numbers. $143,000. That's how much debt was attached to my name, my social security number, my identity. $143,000 I never borrowed, never spent, never agreed to, never knew existed. And every single application had a signature on it. And the signature was in my father's handwriting. I sat in that car for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I want you to know that. I didn't cry. What I did was something that scared me more than crying. I went completely still. Like something in my chest that had been vibrating for years, some low-frequency hum I'd gotten so used to I forgot it was there, suddenly stopped. And in the silence, I heard the thought that would change everything. I have never once had my own credit score. Every number attached to my name has always belonged to him. That was the moment, not a breaking point, a clearing. Like fog burning off a road you've been driving on blind, and suddenly you can see the cliff you've been 2 inches from the entire time. I closed the laptop. I went back inside. I sat at my desk. I pulled up the same verification databases I use every day to check other people's fraud cases. And I started building a file. The thing about being a credit analyst is that I didn't have to guess. I didn't have to wonder. I knew exactly how to pull a full account history for every institution on that list. I knew how to request original application documents. I knew how to cross-reference signature cards. I knew how to flag origination fraud in a format that the CFPB and the FTC take seriously. I knew exactly how this system works because I work inside it every single day. And for the first time in my life, I turned all of that knowledge inward. I pointed the instrument at myself, but I couldn't do it alone. Or rather, I could, but I needed someone with authority. I didn't have to verify what I was finding. That person was Danielle. Danielle sits 3 desks from me. Senior fraud investigator. She's been at the bank 11 years. She has access to verification databases and cross-referencing tools that I can request, but she can authorize. She's also the closest thing I have to a friend at work. We eat lunch together on Tuesdays. We don't talk about personal things much. That's how it is when you've spent your whole life performing normalcy. You learn to be pleasant without ever being vulnerable, but Danielle is sharp. She notices things. And 3 days after I pulled my credit report, when I still hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night and my hands were still trembling slightly when I typed, she stopped by my desk and said, "You look like someone who found something they weren't supposed to find." I told her, "Not all of it. Not yet." I told her I'd found some irregularities on my own report and I wanted her professional opinion. I showed her the Capital One application, the one with the forged signature, the one from when I was 14. She said, "I can't get involved in family stuff, Margot." I understood that. I did. She has her own career to protect, her own boundaries. But I'd prepared for this response. I'd printed the application and placed it next to my actual signature from the same year, pulled from a school permission slip I still had filed away. The 2 signatures were nothing alike. One was the careful, round handwriting of an 8th grader. The other was the compressed, forward-slanting script of a man who had been signing his own name for 40 years and couldn't help letting it bleed through even when he was pretending to be his daughter. Danielle set her coffee down very slowly and didn't pick it up again. She looked at the application for a long time, then she looked at me. Then she pulled up the verification database on her computer, entered the account number, and started cross-referencing. She went through 4 accounts before she said anything. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What replaced it was something professional and cold and precise, the voice she uses in depositions. "This is textbook identity theft, every single one." She said it like a doctor confirming a diagnosis, not with shock, with certainty. And hearing those words from someone who investigates fraud for a living, someone who has no reason to lie to me, someone who is not my father and not my sister and not my uncle. Hearing those words from Danielle was the moment the last piece of my old reality fell away and the new one locked into place. My father had stolen my identity. He had been stealing it since I was 14 years old, and he had used it to build a financial architecture that propped up his life, his other daughter's education, and his own retirement plans, all on the back of a name I didn't know was being used. I had 4 months before the barbecue. I didn't know that yet. The barbecue was still just a vague plan Dennis had mentioned, something about getting the family together, something about a conversation he wanted to have with everyone. I wouldn't learn what that conversation was until later, but the clock was already ticking. I just didn't know what it was counting down to. What I did know was that I had a file to build, and I was going to build it the way I build every fraud case at work. Methodical, documented, sourced, airtight. I wasn't going to confront my father with emotions. I was going to confront him with paperwork, because paperwork doesn't flinch. Paperwork doesn't need to be believed. Paperwork is either accurate or it isn't, and mine was going to be bulletproof. Over the next 4 months, I assembled a 63-page file, every forged application, every false signature, every fraudulent account, organized by date and institution, cross-referenced with my actual whereabouts at the time of each application, my actual employment records, my actual signatures from corresponding periods. I included the account balances, the payment histories, the authorized user designations. I included the contact information for every institution's fraud department. I included template dispute letters pre-addressed to the CFPB and the FTC. I made 3 copies. One for me. One for Danielle's secure files. One for an attorney I hadn't hired yet, but would if I needed to. Each piece of that file was a separate operation, and each operation required a window, a method, and a plan for what to do if I got caught. The first challenge was physical. I needed original application documents from 3 of the accounts, and 2 of those institutions required in-person requests with identity verification. I drove to the Capital One branch in Robinson Township on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break. I told my supervisor I had a dentist appointment. I sat across from a customer service representative named Marcus, who was maybe 24 years old and had no idea he was handing me proof of a crime committed before he was in middle school. He pulled the original application and printed it. I watched it come out of the printer. My father's handwriting, pretending to be mine, pretending to be a 14-year-old girl opening her first credit card. Marcus asked if I needed anything else. I said no. I walked to my car, put the document in a folder, put the folder in my trunk underneath a gym bag, and drove back to work. My hands shook the entire way, but I made it. The second operation was Petra's student loan. That one was harder. The loan servicer required a written request and a 2-week processing time, and the response would come by mail to my home address, my apartment. The apartment whose address my father knew. The apartment Petra sometimes stopped by unannounced. I couldn't have that document arriving in my regular mailbox. I rented a P.O. box at the UPS store on Murray Avenue, paid for it with cash, and redirected the response there. It arrived on a Thursday, $47,000, co-signed by Margot Riley. The signature on the co-signer line was my father's handwriting again. Not even a good forgery. He hadn't bothered to disguise it. Why would he? He never expected me to look, but it was the third operation that nearly ended everything. I needed the tax records. The records showing Dennis had claimed me as a dependent until I was 27. I'd heard this from the family tax preparer, a man named Gary who did returns for half the Rileys in Monroeville. Gary had mentioned it casually at a family dinner, like it was common knowledge. I assumed you still lived at home, he said. I hadn't lived at home since I was 23. Dennis had been claiming me as a dependent for 4 years after I moved out, reducing his tax burden with a fiction. I needed those returns. And to get them, I needed to talk to Gary. Gary's office was in a strip mall in Wilkinsburg. I went on a Saturday morning. I told him I needed copies of my past returns for a mortgage application. He didn't question it. He printed 7 years of returns, handed them to me in a manila envelope, and told me to say hi to my dad. I said I would. I walked out with the envelope, and the numbers were right there in black and white. Dependent Margot E. Riley, year after year after year. I made it back to my car. I made it to the UPS store where my P.O. box was. I was photocopying the returns when my phone rang. Petra. Hey, I'm at your apartment. Where are you? My blood went cold. I had left a printout of one of the account summaries on my desk. I'd been reviewing it the night before and hadn't put it back in the file. Just one page. One page with a Capital One logo and account numbers and my father's name as authorized user. I'm at the grocery store, I said. Be back in 20 minutes. Okay, I'll let myself in. I still have your spare key. I drove back to my apartment faster than I should have. I came through the door with grocery bags I'd bought at the Giant Eagle on the way home, a performance of normalcy for an audience of one. Petra was sitting on my couch scrolling her phone, and on my desk, visible from where she sat, was the printout. She looked up at me. She said, "Why do you have Dad's banking stuff on your desk?" That printout Petra found would come back around, but that Tuesday I didn't know it yet. What I knew was that I was standing in my own apartment holding grocery bags with cold sweat running down my back, and my sister was looking at me with a curiosity that could become suspicion in about 3 seconds. "It's for work," I said. "We're doing compliance audits, and Dad's bank uses the same account formatting. I was comparing templates." It was the most specific lie I've ever told. Specific enough to sound boring, specific enough to make Petra lose interest. She looked at the printout for 1 more second, then shrugged and went back to her phone. "You work too much," she said. I put the groceries away. My hands were shaking inside the bags where she couldn't see. When she left an hour later, I moved the file. All of it. Every document, every printout, every note. I put it in a locked drawer at my office at the bank, a drawer I had access to as an employee for storing sensitive case files. My file sat next to fraud cases I investigated for strangers. The irony was sharp enough to cut. 6 weeks before the barbecue, I learned what the barbecue was actually for. Dennis called me on a Sunday night. Casual voice. The voice he uses when he wants something but wants you to think it was your idea. He said he was thinking about retirement. Said the house in Monroeville was worth something now, and there was a financial product, a reverse mortgage that would let him pull equity and live comfortably. But he needed a co-signer. Someone with good credit. Someone he trusted. Someone like me. He said, "You're the only one I can count on, Margot." And there it was. The pattern. The same pattern since I was 14, since I was 6. I was the rock, the foundation, the signature, the number, the invisible infrastructure that held his life together while he stood on top of it and called himself a good father. He wanted to use my credit one more time, one more document with my name on it, one more forgery, except this time he was asking me to do it myself, to volunteer for the thing he'd been doing to me by force for 9 years. He was asking me to sign my own theft. The barbecue was set for 10 days out. He was going to gather the family, uncles, aunts, cousins, Petra, Linda, and present the co-signing as a family moment. A celebration of Dennis's retirement, a toast to the man who raised 2 girls alone, and I was supposed to sit there and sign, smile and sign, be grateful and sign. I had 10 days to finish the file. I worked on it every night after my shift at the bank. I ate at my desk. I slept 4 hours a night. Danielle stayed late with me twice, cross-referencing the last 3 accounts, verifying the signature analysis on the student loan application. She didn't ask me how I was doing. She knew how I was doing. She just brought coffee and sat next to me and did the work. On the 7th night, something happened that almost broke me. Dennis took me to dinner, just the 2 of us. He picked a restaurant in Shadyside, a nice place, the kind of place he never took me growing up because we couldn't afford it. He ordered a bottle of wine. He told stories about when I was small. He laughed. He reached across the table and held my hand. Then he gave me a bracelet. My mother's bracelet. A thin gold chain with a small oval locket tarnished around the clasp. He said he'd been holding on to it, waiting for the right time. He said my mother would have wanted me to have it. He handed me the bracelet with tears in his eyes. His hands were perfectly steady. I put it on. I felt the weight of it on my wrist, the cool metal against my skin, the slight catch of the clasp against the small hairs on my forearm. And for maybe 90 seconds, I was 6 years old again, sitting at the kitchen table believing my father was the only person in the world who would never hurt me. Then he mentioned the co-signing, casually, as a formality. We'll get it sorted at the barbecue, nothing complicated, just a signature. He squeezed my hand, and the 90 seconds ended. I looked at the bracelet. I looked at his face, and I saw both things at once for the first time. The father who gave me my mother's jewelry and the man who forged my name on a credit application when I was 14. Both real, both sitting across from me, both using love as a delivery system for something that wasn't love at all. I smiled. I said, "Of course, Dad." I finished my wine. I went home. I added 3 more pages to the file. The last pieces fell into place in the final week. I filed formal disputes with every institution on the list. 7 institutions, 7 disputes, each one documented, each one citing the forged signatures, each one referencing the CFPB complaint I'd prepared. I filed them on Monday. The barbecue was Saturday. By the time Dennis stood in his backyard and asked me to sign, every fraudulent account attached to my name would already be under formal review. I also found an apartment. Not in Pittsburgh, in Lawrenceville technically, which is Pittsburgh, but far enough from Monroeville and Greenfield that no one in my family would stumble across it. A 1-bedroom on Butler Street above a coffee shop. I found it on a Wednesday afternoon, toured it on my lunch break, signed the lease that same day. The landlord ran my credit and I told him about the disputes. He read the cover letter I'd prepared, a professional summary of the identity theft and the active fraud investigations. He looked at my employment verification. He looked at my bank statements, the real ones, the account my father didn't know about, the one I'd opened at a different bank 6 weeks earlier and had been routing a portion of my direct deposit to ever since. He approved me. I paid first and last month's rent in a cashier's check. I had the key in my hand by Thursday. That key. I held it in my palm in the parking lot outside the apartment and I looked at it like it was something from another planet. It was small and brass and slightly warm from my hand, and it opened a door that no one in my family knew existed. No one had the address. No one had a spare key. No one could show up unannounced and find printouts on my desk and ask questions I had to lie my way out of. That key was the first thing in my life that belonged only to me. I moved things slowly, a bag at a time, clothes and toiletries first, carried out of my old apartment in a gym bag on the way to the gym. Documents next transferred from my office drawer to the Lawrenceville apartment in my work bag. A few kitchen items, a blanket, a pillow, not much. I wasn't building a home yet. I was building an extraction point, a place to land when the freefall started. The night before the barbecue, I lay in my old apartment one last time. I could hear the street outside, the sound of buses on Murray Avenue, the same buses I'd been hearing for 9 years. I thought about the morning. I thought about the file sitting in my bag, 63 pages, 4 months of work, 9 years of theft, 14 years of lies, all bound in a black folder with numbered tabs. I thought about the laptop I'd bring with the credit reports pulled up, ready to project. I thought about the faces I was about to change. I didn't sleep. I lay there with my mother's bracelet on my wrist, the gold warm now from 4 days of wearing it, and I ran through the sequence one more time. The drive to Monroeville, the walk through the backyard, the table where the cosign paperwork would be laid out, the moment I'd say no, the moment I'd show them why. My alarm went off at 6. I was already awake. I showered. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes with pockets because I wanted my phone close and my keys closer, choosing shoes I could walk in because I knew I'd be leaving and I didn't want to stumble. I put on the bracelet, my mother's locket catching the bathroom light. I looked at myself in the mirror and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Everything I needed to communicate was in the file. I drove to Monroeville. Saturday morning, the roads were clear. I took Route 376 east past the Squirrel Hill Tunnel, through the stretch of highway where the hills open up and you can see the whole suburban sprawl of the eastern suburbs spread out below you. Dennis's house sat on a cul-de-sac off Haymaker Road. I'd been driving there my whole life. I knew every turn. I pulled up, and there were already 6 cars in the driveway and along the curb. The barbecue was in full swing. I could smell charcoal from the street. I walked around the side of the house to the backyard. 15 people, uncles, aunts, cousins. Linda was at the grill. Petra was at the drink table laughing at something. Uncle Ray was sitting in a lawn chair with a beer, and Dennis was at the center of it all, holding court at a folding table where a small stack of papers sat neatly next to a pen. The co-signed documents, ready for me. He saw me and opened his arms. "There she is," he said. "There's my rock." I hugged him. I felt the bracelet pressed between us. I smelled the cologne he'd worn my entire life, the same one. Old Spice and something woodsy, the smell of childhood, the smell of every lie he'd ever told. I stepped back. "I brought my laptop," I said. "I want to show everyone something before we do any paperwork." Dennis looked at me. Just for a second, something flickered across his face. Not suspicion, not yet. Just the faintest recalibration of someone who is used to controlling the script and has just noticed an unplanned line. He recovered in half a second. "Sure, sweetheart, whatever you need." I set the laptop on the folding table. Right next to his co-signed documents, I opened it. I'd already prepared the display, the 2 screens side by side, ready to project to the larger monitor I'd asked Petra to set up for a family slideshow I'd mentioned wanting to show. Petra had thought I was putting together photos. She set up the TV on the patio, connected the HDMI cable, asked me if I wanted music playing behind it. I said no music. I connected the laptop, the screen filled the TV, and there it was. On the left side, 7 credit account applications, each one bearing a signature that read Margot Riley. On the right side, my actual signature from corresponding years. The comparison was devastating. The forged signatures were clearly, obviously, unmistakably in a different hand. They were in Dennis's hand. The same compressed, forward slanting script. The same way he wrote his R's, his L's, the same slight lift between the T and the second half of his name. His handwriting, wearing my name like a costume that didn't fit. The yard went quiet, not all at once. It took about 4 seconds. The conversation died in patches, spreading outward from the TV screen like ripples in water, as one person after another turned and saw what was on the display and stopped mid-sentence. I stood next to the screen. I looked at my father. He was staring at the display with an expression I'd never seen on him before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shame. It was the face of someone watching a building collapse and realizing they're inside it. I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This is a Capital One credit card opened in my name on March 14th, 2006. I was 14 years old. The balance carried to collection was $12,400. I did not open this account. The signature on the application is not mine." I clicked to the next comparison. "This is a Discover card opened in my name on June 22nd, 2008. I was 16. Balance, $8,200. I did not open this account." Next, "This is a personal loan from First Federal Credit Union. Opened September 3rd, 2009. I was 17. Amount $15,000. I did not open this account." Next, "This is a private student loan from Sally Mae, co-signed by Margot Riley on August 15th, 2011. The loan was for $47,000. It funded Petra's tuition at Duquesne University. I was 19 years old and working double shifts at a grocery store. I never co-signed this loan. I never knew it existed. I looked at Petra when I said that. She was standing by the drink table with a red cup in her hand, frozen. The cup was tilted slightly, and a thin line of lemonade was running down the side and dripping onto her shoe, and she wasn't moving to stop it. Next, 2 additional credit cards opened in my name when I was 21 and 22. Combined balance, $23,000. A Lowe's retail credit line opened when I was 24. Balance, $6,800. I looked at the yard. 15 faces, some confused, some horrified. Uncle Ray was not looking at the screen. He was looking at his hands. The total balance of debt attached to my name, opened without my knowledge or consent, is $143,000. Every application was signed in my father's handwriting. Every account was opened using my social security number. For 9 years, my identity has been used as a line of credit by the man standing in front of you. Dennis moved then. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping on the patio concrete. He said, "Now hold on, Margot, hold on. This is not what it looks like. Those accounts, I can explain those accounts." I waited. He looked at the family gathered around. He looked at Uncle Ray. He looked at Linda. He said, "Some of those were joint accounts. You knew about some of those, Margot. We talked about this. When you were younger, I set up some accounts to build your credit. That's all it was. I was trying to help you build credit. I was 14, I said. You don't build a 14-year-old's credit with a $12,000 balance. The student loan," he started. "The student loan you told Petra I volunteered for?" I turned to Petra. She hadn't moved. The lemonade was pooling around her shoe. "Did you know?" I asked her. "Did you know the money for your tuition had my name on it?" The silence that followed was the loudest sound I've ever heard, because Petra didn't say no. She didn't look confused. She looked at the ground, and then very quietly she said, "Dad told me you offered." "I was working at Giant Eagle making $9 an hour," I said. "When in that story, did I offer to co-sign a $47,000 loan?" Petra didn't answer. I turned back to the full yard. Uncle Ray was trying to make himself smaller in his lawn chair. I spoke to him directly. "Ray, I know you notarized 3 of these applications. You told me at Thanksgiving that Dad said I knew about them. I want you to know that those notarizations are now part of a formal complaint with the notary board." Uncle Ray started to say something about the notarizations, then looked at Dennis and closed his mouth. I closed the laptop. I picked up the cosign documents from the table. I looked at them, then at my father. "I'm not co-signing anything," I said, "because I've already been signed without my consent for 9 years. Every institution on this list has received a formal dispute as of last Monday. The CFPB has my complaint. The FTC has a copy. Every fraudulent account attached to my name is now under active investigation." Dennis's face had gone through several colors during my presentation. Red, then white, then a gray I'd never seen on a living person. He reached for the edge of the table. "You're going to ruin me," he said. "You're going to ruin this family." I picked up my laptop. I picked up my bag. I stood in my father's backyard in Monroeville with the smell of charcoal and the sound of 15 people breathing and the weight of my mother's bracelet on my wrist. And I said the last thing I would say to him for a very long time. "You ruined my credit before I was old enough to drive. You put $143,000 of debt on a child who trusted you. You let me believe for 9 years that my own credit score was a mystery, while you used it as your personal bank account. I am not the one who ruined this family, Dad. I am the one who finally read the paperwork." I walked back through the side yard. I got in my car, I drove out of the cul-de-sac on Haymaker Road, and I did not look in the rearview mirror. I took Route 376 west through the tunnel past Squirrel Hill into the city. I drove to Lawrenceville. I parked on Butler Street. I walked up the stairs above the coffee shop. I put the brass key in the lock and turned it. The door opened. I stepped inside. I closed it behind me. I locked it. The deadbolt slid home with a sound that I felt in my sternum, a heavy, clean, final click. And then there was silence. Not the silence of a house where someone might come home any moment and you'd have to rearrange your face and your papers and your thoughts. Not the silence of holding your breath. Not the silence of waiting. Just silence. The apartment was still mostly empty, a mattress on the floor, a lamp, a box of dishes I'd moved over 2 weeks earlier. The window was open and I could hear the coffee shop below, the murmur of conversation and the hiss of a steam wand. And outside, Butler Street on a Saturday afternoon, people walking, a dog barking somewhere, the ordinary sound of a world that didn't know my name or my credit score or my father. I stood in the middle of that apartment and I breathed, a real breath. The kind that starts at the bottom of your lungs and fills all the way up. The kind I hadn't taken in so long that my ribs ached with the expansion of it. Like a room being opened for the first time in years. All the air rushing in and the dust lifting and settling and the space becoming real. My hands started shaking, not from fear, from release. The same way your body trembles after you've been holding something heavy for too long and you finally set it down. I was shaking from the absence of weight. My knees went soft and I sat on the floor, just sat right down on the hardwood with my back against the wall, and I pressed my palms flat on the floor and felt the wood under my hands solid and cool in mine, and I stayed there for a long time. If you've ever been afraid to check your own credit report because of someone who was supposed to protect you, I want to tell you something. That fear is not weakness. It's your instinct telling you the truth before the numbers do. Your body knows before your brain is ready to admit it. The reluctance to look isn't denial. It's self-preservation. You're not looking because you already know that what you find will require you to rebuild everything you thought was true. And you're right, it will. But the rebuilding is yours. The truth is yours. The credit report, the documents, the numbers, they don't belong to the person who stole them. They belong to you. Have you ever discovered something a family member did in your name? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear it. The phone started ringing that night. The first call came at 7:14 p.m. Dennis. I watched his name appear on my screen, the letters glowing in my dark apartment, and I let it ring. It went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He called again at 7:22, again at 7:45. At 8:03, a text. Margot, call me. We need to talk about what happened today. At 8:30, Petra called. I watched her name. I didn't answer. At 9:15, Dennis again. This time, he left a voicemail. I listened to it once in the dark, sitting on my mattress on the floor. His voice was measured, controlled, the voice of a man who has spent 30 years managing other people's perceptions. Margot, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Those accounts, I opened those to help you. Your credit needed building. I can explain all of it. Just call me back and we'll sort this out as a family. I didn't call him back. At 10:40 p.m., a text from Linda. Your father is devastated. I've never seen him like this. How could you ambush him like that in front of everyone? He gave everything for you girls. At 11:15, Uncle Ray. Margot, I think you're making a mistake. Your dad meant well. Can we talk before this gets out of hand? I turned my phone face down on the floor. I lay on my mattress and I stared at the ceiling. The ceiling was white, freshly painted by the landlord before I moved in, and it had no cracks, no water stains, no history. It was blank. It was mine. Sunday morning, 23 missed calls, 14 from Dennis, 6 from Petra, 2 from Uncle Ray, 1 from a number I didn't recognize. 11 text messages. I read them in order. Dennis, 6 a.m. I'm coming to your apartment. We need to talk face to face. He meant my old apartment, the one on Murray Avenue, the one I hadn't slept in since Friday night. He didn't know about Lawrenceville. He didn't know about Butler Street. He didn't have the address, the key, or the power to stand at my door and wait me out. Dennis, 7:30 a.m. You're not home. Where are you? This isn't like you, Margot. Petra, 8 a.m. Dad's really upset. He went to your place and you weren't there. Where are you staying? Can you just call me? Dennis, 9:45 a.m. I talked to a lawyer. He says you can't just file disputes without my side of the story. Call me. Dennis, 11 a.m. I'm calling your work on Monday. Dennis, 1 p.m. Margot, please. Each message was a stage of the same progression I'd watched play out in fraud cases at the bank. Confusion first, then attempted control, then threats, then the legal bluff, the claim of rights that don't exist, then the appeal to authority, the promise to escalate, then finally, when none of it works, the single word that reveals everything, please. The word of a person who has run out of leverage and has nothing left but the hope that emotional muscle memory will do what power can no longer accomplish. I didn't respond to any of them. Monday morning, I went to work. My supervisor called me in. Dennis had called the bank. He'd told them his daughter was having a mental health crisis and he was concerned about her access to sensitive financial systems. My supervisor looked at me across his desk with an expression that was careful and professional and slightly embarrassed. I told him the truth. I told him about the identity theft. I told him about the disputes. I told him I had a 63-page file documenting every fraudulent account. I told him Danielle had verified the signature analysis. He called Danielle in. She confirmed everything. My supervisor closed his office door and spent 20 minutes on the phone with the bank's legal department. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "Your father's call has been flagged as a potential retaliation attempt. You're not in any trouble. Take whatever time you need." I didn't take time. I went back to my desk. I had fraud cases to review, other people's fraud cases. The irony hadn't gotten less sharp. Over the next 4 months, the infrastructure collapsed. Not dramatically, quietly. The way a building comes down when you remove one load-bearing wall and gravity does the rest. The accounts in my name were frozen under fraud review. Everyone. The banks and credit institutions that had processed Dennis's applications were now investigating their own liability, and they were not sympathetic to the man who had filed them. Dennis's application for the home equity line, the one he'd been counting on, the one Linda had mentioned as part of his retirement cushion, was denied. The house in Monroeville couldn't be leveraged because the credit profile he'd been piggybacking on was no longer available. Petra's MBA loan triggered a cosigner verification. The institution wanted to confirm that the cosigner, Margot Riley, had actually signed the original loan. She hadn't. The verification failed. The loan went into review. Petra called me 6 times the week she found out. I didn't answer. On the 7th call, she left a voicemail. Her voice was different from the Sunday texts, smaller. "Margot, they're saying the cosigner on my loan might not be valid. I don't understand what's happening. Can you just explain it to me? I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." But she had known. Not the full scope, not the details, but she'd known the money had my name on it. When I confronted her privately, months before the barbecue, she'd said the sentence that still sits in my chest like a splinter I can't reach. "Dad told me you volunteered. Besides, you didn't even go to college. What did you need credit for?" What did you need credit for? As if credit is something you only deserve if you use it the way the family decides. As if my financial identity was a shared resource, available to whoever needed it more. And since I was just working at a grocery store, since I was just the rock, since I was just the foundation, what could I possibly need it for? Uncle Ray received a notary board inquiry. He called me once. I answered that one. He said, "Margot, I didn't know. Your dad said you knew about it. He said you wanted to help your sister." I said, "Ray, you notarized a credit application for a 17-year-old without ever speaking to her. Did that seem right to you?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No, it didn't." And that was the last conversation we had. Dennis's discovery that the daughter he treated as a blank signature was the only signature that made any of it work came in stages. First, the home equity denial, then the account freezes, then the institutional inquiries, then the letter from the CFPB acknowledging the complaint. Each one was a wall falling, a support beam removed, a piece of the architecture he'd built on my name crumbling under the weight of its own fraud. He'd built his financial life on a foundation that was never his to use, and when I reclaimed it, everything above it came down. He tried one more time. 5 weeks after the barbecue, I was in my Lawrenceville apartment making dinner, actually cooking. Something I'd started doing in the new place because the kitchen was small and bright and entirely mine, and I could leave dishes in the sink overnight without anyone commenting. My phone rang. "Dennis." I didn't answer, but then a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Margot, it's Linda. Your father is going to lose the house. He hasn't eaten in 3 days. He is your father. How can you do this to your own father?" I read the text standing at my stove, steam rising from a pot of pasta, and I felt something shift. Not guilt, something older, something that lived in the body of the 6-year-old who sat at the kitchen table and was told that mommy had to go away. The 6-year-old who needed her father to be good, who needed the story of his sacrifice to be true, because if it wasn't true, then she'd been alone her whole life and never known it. I let that feeling rise. I let it fill my chest, and then I let it pass. Because I was 32 years old, standing in my own kitchen, in an apartment I'd secured with my own employment and my own savings, and the man who was losing his house had built it on my stolen name. His discomfort was not my emergency. Not anymore. I deleted the text. I ate my pasta. I went to bed. The family group chat was the last thread. It had been active my entire adult life. Birthday messages, holiday plans, passive-aggressive comments about who was bringing what to Thanksgiving. It was the digital architecture of a family that had always looked normal from the outside and was rotting from the inside. I sat in my apartment on a Tuesday evening, 2 months after the barbecue. My phone was on the table. 34 missed calls accumulated over the past weeks, their names still visible in my call log. Dennis, Petra, Uncle Ray, Linda, a cousin I barely talked to. The family group chat was still pinging. I opened it one last time. The most recent messages were from Petra. Does anyone know where Margot is living now? She won't answer me. From Dennis, she's confused. She'll come around. She always does. She always does. She always does. I tapped the 3 dots in the corner. I tapped delete and leave group. The confirmation prompt appeared. I tapped yes. And the last digital thread connecting me to the family that had used me as a financial instrument for 9 years went silent. My phone kept lighting up. I watched each name appear on the screen, one by one, as they realized I was gone from the chat. Dennis, Petra, Linda, Uncle Ray. 34 missed calls glowing in a dark apartment, and I watched every single one ring out and go to voicemail without lifting my hand. The first weeks in Lawrenceville were not euphoric. I want to be honest about that. Freedom didn't feel like a movie. It felt like learning to use a limb that had been in a cast for 9 years. Every small decision, what to eat, what time to go to bed, whether to answer the phone or let it ring, every one of these was a decision I was making without checking it against someone else's expectations. And that was disorienting. I'd wake up in the morning and lie still for a few minutes, listening to the coffee shop below, the steam and the murmur, and the opening of the front door as the first customers came in, and I'd realize that no one knew I was awake. No one was tracking my morning. No one needed anything from me. The day was mine. I met Danielle for lunch that first week, not at work, at a restaurant in Lawrenceville near my new place. She looked different outside the office, or maybe I was seeing her differently. She ordered a sandwich and a coffee, and she looked at me across the table and said, "How are you actually doing?" It was the first time someone had asked me that, and I didn't have to calculate the answer. I didn't have to figure out what they wanted to hear, what would keep the peace, what would avoid triggering a conversation I wasn't ready for. I just had to tell the truth. "I'm terrified," I said, "and I'm free, and I don't know how to be both at the same time yet." She nodded. She didn't try to fix it. She just ate her sandwich and asked if I needed help with anything in the new place. I said I could use a bookshelf. She said she had one in her garage that she'd been meaning to get rid of. She brought it over the next Saturday. We carried it up the stairs together. I put my file on the bottom shelf. 63 pages in a black folder with numbered tabs. The document that changed everything, sitting on a shelf in a home no one gave me permission to have. Time did what time does. It moved. 3 months after the barbecue, my credit disputes began resolving. One by one, the fraudulent accounts were removed from my record. Each removal letter arrived at my P.O. box like a small ceremony. Capital 1. Resolved. Account removed. Balance discharged. Discover. Resolved. First Federal Credit Union. Resolved. Each letter was a digit added back to a score that had been stolen from me before I knew I had one. My credit score climbed from that original 490 to 580, then 620. Then, on a morning in March, I opened the portal and saw 710. 710? A number that belonged to me. The first credit score in my life that was actually mine. I sat at my kitchen table, the small one I'd bought from a secondhand store on Penn Avenue, and I looked at that number on my screen, and the feeling that came wasn't triumph. It was grief. Grief for the 23-year-old who was denied her first apartment and didn't understand why. Grief for the 19-year-old working double shifts while her name was being used to fund someone else's future. Grief for the 14-year-old whose father opened a credit card in her name and used her trust as collateral. I cried then, for the first time since this started, not at the barbecue, not in the car afterward, not in the empty apartment on the first night. I cried at my kitchen table at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning looking at a number on a screen because that number was finally telling the truth about who I was. And the truth was that I had been robbed and I had survived it and I was here. The bracelet sits in my bedside drawer now, my mother's locket. The gold chain Dennis gave me at that dinner in Shadyside, the one with the tears in his eyes and the steady hands. I don't wear it anymore, but I haven't thrown it away. I placed it in the drawer next to the file. The last beautiful thing he gave me, right next to the proof of everything he took. Some nights I open the drawer and look at them both, the bracelet and the folder, love and theft, side by side, from the same pair of hands. Dennis didn't lose the house. Not yet. Last I heard from a cousin who still talks to both sides, he's behind on the property taxes and trying to refinance, but without my credit profile to lean on, the numbers don't work. He's 61. He spent 30 years building a retirement plan on his daughter's stolen identity, and now that the identity has been reclaimed, the plan has no foundation. I don't feel satisfaction about that. I don't feel guilt either. I feel the weight of a thing that should never have been built in the first place, finally resting on the shoulders of the person who built it. Petra finished her MBA. I don't know how she paid for it after the cosigner verification failed. I assume she took out loans in her own name, which is what should have happened in the first place. She sent me a letter, a real letter, on paper to my P.O. box. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't fully understand until she saw the applications on the screen at the barbecue. She said she'd been telling herself the story Dad told her because the alternative was unbearable. I read the letter twice. I haven't responded yet. I don't know if I will. Some doors need to stay closed long enough for the air on both sides to change. Maybe one day I'll open that one, but it'll be on my time, with my key, and only if the person on the other side has stopped treating my name like something she's entitled to use. It is a Saturday morning in Lawrenceville, 7 months after the barbecue. I'm at the kitchen table, the window is open. Butler Street is waking up, the coffee shop below running its first batch, the steam hissing, the bells on the door ringing as people come in for their morning cup. I can hear all of it, and none of it is a threat. None of it requires monitoring or interpretation or the careful parsing of tone that tells you whether the next hour will be safe or dangerous. It's just sound. The sound of a street that doesn't know my name. The sound of a morning that belongs to me. My credit score is 724 now. That number is mine. Every digit earned, every point recovered, every fraudulent mark removed by a system that, when presented with 63 pages of evidence, actually worked. Some nights, I still hear my father's voice from when I was small, reading to me before bed, and I miss that version of him with something that sits right below my ribs. But that man and the man who forged my name on a credit application when I was 14 cannot both be real. I chose to believe the paperwork. I used to think family loyalty meant accepting whatever was done to you because the person who did it was supposed to love you. I was wrong. Loyalty isn't silence. It's not signing your name on the line someone else drew. It's the willingness to tell the truth, even when the truth dismantles the only story you've ever known about who raised you and why. If you're sitting somewhere right now with a drawer you haven't opened, a report you haven't pulled, a question you haven't asked because the answer might change everything, I want you to know the answer is already true whether you look at it or not. Looking doesn't create the damage. Looking is the first step towards stopping it. This is Margot's story, and it has been told. One brass key to an apartment no one else had the address for. One bracelet in a drawer beside a 63-page file. And one credit score, finally, that belonged to the woman whose name was on it all along. If you've ever had your trust turned into a line of credit by someone who was supposed to protect you, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe.